untouched treasures. A deadly curse?
Imagine this. A young king, barely known, his name almost lost to time, but unlike, the grandest pharaohs whose huge tombs were looted centuries ago, his burial place lay hidden, sealed, untouched for over 3,000 years.
It's incredible, really. Just the sheer luck involved.
Exactly. That twist of fate that kept this one place like a direct window into the past, it's the kind of mystery that just grabs you, right?
Absolutely. And the story of actually finding it is almost as dramatic as what was inside.
It really is. It starts with Howard Carter, a British archaeologist who was just completely focused on this. He was convinced something huge was still buried in the Valley of the Kings.
Even when most experts were saying, nope, it's all been found.
Right. And for years, his patron, Lord Carnarvon, was getting impatient. Funding was drying up. But Carter kept searching, failure after failure.
He just had this gut feeling, didn't he? That conviction that one more big discovery was waiting.
And wow, what a discovery it turned out to be. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack the sources you've shared, look at the amazing story behind Tutankhamun, how this pharaoh, who was, relatively minor in life, became maybe the most famous Egyptian ruler after death.
Yeah, we'll look at the discovery itself, that whole legend of the curse, his life, his death, which is still kind of mysterious, and, the debates that are still going on today.
Let's dive in.
Okay,
so let's set the scene. Early 20th century Egyptology. The Valley of the Kings was basically considered, tapped out.
Yeah, exhausted was the word often used. People like Theodore Davis had found bits and pieces related to Tutankhamun before even his embalming cache.
Right, so they figured that was probably it. Davis even wrote a book saying he thought the valley was empty of royal tombs.
But Carter, with Lord Carnarvon backing him, he didn't buy it. They've been digging elsewhere, kind of waiting for their chance at the main valley area.
And when they finally got that concession in 1915, they started this really systematic search. But for years, nothing much. They were right on the edge of giving up by 1922.
That's when it gets really tense, doesn't it? Carter basically had to persuade Carnarvon to fund just one last season.
And then, November 1922, boom, persistence pays off.
Totally unexpected.
Yeah.
Underneath all this debris from when they cut a later tomb, KV9.
That's Ramesses VI's tomb.
Right. And also, crucially, under these ancient workmen's huts that had basically just buried the entrance and hidden it for centuries, they found a step, just a single step, cut into the rock.
Amazing. And what's interesting? The sources mention there are even slightly different stories about who found that first step.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Carter credited his workmen digging under the huts, but other accounts, apparently going back to interviews later, suggest maybe it was a young water boy, Hussein Abdel Rasul, working a bit away from the main group.
So even the very beginning has a little bit of intrigue around it.
Totally. So that first step leads to more steps, down to a sealed doorway, with royal shields still intact.
Yeah, it must have been the moment Carter knew. This was it.
Absolutely. He famously cabled Lord Carnarvon back in England.
Yeah.
Have made wonderful discovery in Valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered, same, pending your arrival. Congratulations.
Can you imagine getting that telegram? The wait for Carnarvon to get back to Egypt must have been agonizing.
Oh, for sure. Weeks of anticipation. Which brings us to that iconic date. November 26, 1922. Carnarvon's there, his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, a few others.
And they make a little hole, top left corner of that sealed door. Carter holds up the candle, peers inside.
And Carnarvon, probably bursting with impatience, asks that famous question.
Do you see anything?
And Carter's reply, so understated but so powerful, yes, wonderful things.
Chills, just thinking about it. The sources say that first glimpse into the antechamber was just an explosion of gold.
Yeah, like a chaotic jumble, gilded chariots, statues, furniture, chests, all piled up just how they'd left it over 3,000 years ago.
It must have felt like looking through time, a direct window into this lost world, the exact moment they sealed it up.
It's just unparalleled in archaeology, isn't it? That feeling of seeing something untouched for millennia. And the sheer amount of stuff quickly became obvious.
Oh, yeah. It took Carter 10 years to clear, document, and catalog everything. 10 years.
For over 5,000 objects. Just incredible.
And the range is just staggering. You've got the big famous pieces everyone knows, the solid gold inner coffin, and of course that golden mask.
Which is basically the symbol of ancient Egypt now, right?
Absolutely. But then there's everything else. The huge gilded shrines around the sarcophagus, the chariots, all the intricate jewelry, ceremonial daggers, even like everyday items made into beautiful art for the afterlife.
And the sources point out some really fascinating details, don't they? Like that one dagger.
Oh, the iron dagger, yeah. Made from meteoric iron, not earthly iron.
From space,
Yeah.
which tells you how much they valued materials maybe seen as divine thousands of years before we really understood meteorites. Amazing.
And another interesting thing the sources mention is that quite a few items look like they were actually adapted or reused from previous owners.
Like maybe Smenkar or Neferneferuaten, those kind of shadowy figures around Akhenaten.
Exactly. Which hints that Tutankhamun's burial might have been a bit rushed, grabbing things quickly because he died suddenly.
Gives you a sense of the practicalities behind all the splendor. And the mummy itself, it's still there, right?
Yeah, the sources say it's now displayed in a special climate-controlled case inside the tomb, while most of the treasures are heading to the new Grand Egyptian Museum.
Okay, so that's the physical stuff, but the discovery also unleashed something else entirely.
Ah, yes. The Pharaoh's curse, which the newspapers absolutely jumped on.
Yeah, that sensational story really took off, didn't it?
And the main fuel for that fire was Lord Carnarvon's death, happening just months after the tomb was officially opened.
He died in Cairo, April 1923. But the reality, as the sources make clear, was, well, less supernatural.
Right. It was pneumonia, stemming from an infected mosquito bite. And the sources point out he wasn't in the best health to begin with that car accident years earlier, plus the stress of the dig probably weakened him.
So, a tragic but understandable medical cause, really, not ancient magic.
But the press ran with the curse idea, and then other deaths got linked to it too.
Huh.
Carnarvon's half-brother, a radiologist who x-rayed the mummy.
But when you actually look at the numbers the sources provide, the curse theory kind of falls apart, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, out of 58 people present at the openings, only 8 died within 12 years, which statistically isn't that unusual.
And the big one, Howard Carter himself. He spent a decade in that tomb, working closely with everything, and he lived until 1939, died of lymphoma, age 64.
Exactly. And Lady Evelyn, Carnarvon's daughter, one of the very first inside the inn, she lived another 57 years until 1980. Another archaeologist involved, J.O. Kinnaman, lived 39 more years.
So it really seems like the curse was mostly, a great story for the media rather than an actual ancient hex.
Pretty much. A juicy narrative to go with an already incredible find.
Okay, so beyond the gold and the rumors, who was Tutankhamun? Let's shift focus to the boy king himself.
Right. His life was short, but quite significant in its way. Starting with his family, the DNA evidence points pretty strongly now.
Yeah, the analysis suggests he was the son of Akhenaten, the mummy found in tomb KV55, and a mummy known as the Younger Lady from KV35.
And the really striking thing the sources highlight is that Akhenaten and the Younger Lady were full brother and sister, children of Amenhotep III and Queen Tai.
Wow, that's a very close family relationship. The sources do mention, though, that interpreting ancient DNA can be tricky, and there are some alternative ideas out there.
True, some researchers still debate it, maybe suggesting Nefertiti was his mother through perhaps a cousin marriage or something similar. Ancient royal families were complex.
Definitely. But whatever the exact parentage, we know he became pharaoh super young, right? Like maybe 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah, and he only reigned for about 9 years, succeeding those figures we mentioned earlier, Smenkhare or Neferneferuaten.
And his reign is really defined by turning things around, isn't it? Reversing his father Akhenaten's radical religious changes.
Absolutely. Akhenaten had pushed this sort of near monotheism, worshipping the Aten sun disk, ditched the traditional gods, even moved the capital to Amarna.
And Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhamun, just undid all of it. Changed his name, brought back Amun in the old pantheon, moved the capital back to Memphis, restored the temples and priests.
We have solid evidence for this, like the restoration stela. It dates from his 4th year as king and basically calls the previous era a disaster and lays out the plan for rebuilding the traditional cults. A huge policy shift for such a young ruler.
He also started some building projects at Karnak and Luxor, though apparently many weren't finished before he died and got taken over by his successor.
Interestingly, the sources note he was actually worshipped as a god during his lifetime, which was quite rare. There were cults in Nubia, and a stela even compares his divinity to the main god Amun.
Given that Egypt was apparently pretty weak economically and diplomatically after Akhenaten's time, what about the military side? Was Tutankhamun involved there?
Well, he definitely tried to restore Egypt's standing. We find gifts from foreign powers in his tomb, suggesting diplomatic efforts. And his mortuary temple claims victories in campaigns in Nubia and the Near East. His military record, as far as we know, was undefeated.
But the big question is, did he personally fight?
That's the debate. The arguments for him being an active warrior point to all the military gear in his tomb bows, swords, daggers, loads of them, many showing signs of use and inscribed with his name.
Plus the artwork, right? Images showing him smiting enemies, riding a chariot, firing arrows.
Exactly. Egyptologist Bob Breyer, for instance, makes a strong case for his active participation.
But then the counter-argument focuses on his youth and these potential physical issues, like maybe needing canes because of a foot problem, suggesting he might have just gone along with the army for morale, not actually fought.
Yeah, although some more recent analysis, like from Sophia Aziz, questions how debilitating those physical issues really were. She suggests maybe earlier interpretations were influenced by damage to the mummy, and he might have been more physically capable than sometimes portrayed.
Shows how science keeps refining the picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking of his health, that leads to the biggest mystery. Why did he die so young, around 19?
Yeah, what happened? We know from the mummy he was slightly built, about 5'6", had that characteristic family overbite, narrow waist.
Over the years, people have suggested all sorts of things based on early looks or even Marfan syndrome, other genetic disorders. But modern scans and DNA tests have mostly ruled those out.
Right. The scans did show things like a partially cleft palate, maybe mild scoliosis, and then there's the foot issue.
The flat right foot and the possible clubbed left foot, or maybe bone necrosis, linked to all those canes found in the tomb.
Although, again, there's debate. The sources mention the wear pattern on the canes isn't what you'd expect if you depended on them heavily. And his sandals show even wear. So maybe the canes were more status symbols.
It's complicated, but what do the sources point to as really crucial findings for his death?
Two big things. First, the DNA analysis confirmed malaria. Multiple strains, actually. It's the oldest genetic proof of malaria we have, and it shows he had repeated bouts of a really severe form.
Wow. So he was likely weakened by that already.
And then, critically, the scans found a nasty fracture in his left leg. A compound fracture.
Meaning the bone broke through the skin.
Exactly. And the sources stress the fracture edges were ragged, not clean breaks from later handling. Plus, they found embalming resins inside the wound. That means it was an open wound when he died or was embalmed, and crucially, there were no signs of healing.
So putting it together, the leading theory now, based on the sources, is that he likely died from complications from that broken leg, maybe infection, maybe a fat embolism, and his already weakened state from severe malaria made him unable to fight it off.
A deadly combination. It makes a lot more sense than some of the older theories.
Yeah, like murder from a blow to the head. The scans showed loose skull fragments, but likely from handling after burial, no sign of a fatal injury.
Right. And the chariot accident theory, based on missing ribs, also seems unlikely now. Analysis suggests those ribs were probably taken by tomb robbers after he was buried, not an injury that killed him.
So with Tutankhamun dead around 19, and his daughters apparently stillborn or dying very young, that was it for the main royal line of the 18th dynasty, wasn't it?
A sudden end, which created a power vacuum. Interestingly, Tutankhamun seems to have designated his top general, Horemheb, as his heir. The tomb records call him Lord of the Land.
But Horemheb didn't immediately take over, did he?
No. The vizier, who was much older and possibly related somehow, maybe Tutankhamun's great-uncle, he made his move. There's that whole fascinating story about Tutankhamun's widow, Ankhesenamun.
The Zananza affair, where she supposedly wrote to the Hittite king asking for one of his sons to marry, maybe to avoid marrying Ai or Horemheb.
Exactly. It seems she failed, though. Ai ended up taking the throne. He likely married Ankhesenamun, and significantly, he's depicted performing Tutankhamun's funeral rites, which was typically the successor's job.
So Horemheb got pushed aside, at least temporarily.
Seems so. I ruled for just a few years, and then Horemheb did finally become pharaoh. He finished the job of restoring the old religion and basically set the stage for the next big era, the Ramesside period.
And here's a crucial point the sources make. Horemheb later went back and defaced Ai's monuments, trying to erase him from history.
Standard practice, damnatio memoriae, to legitimize his own rule.
But he left Tutankhamun's tomb completely alone, untouched.
And that decision, maybe out of respect, maybe for other reasons, was the key. By leaving it intact and hidden, Horemheb accidentally guaranteed its survival and ultimately Tutankhamun's incredible modern fame.
Which brings us right up to today. Tutankhamun, this relatively minor boy king, is now probably the most famous pharaoh ever, purely because his tomb survived intact.
It's all about the tomb. The discovery and then those huge international exhibitions of the treasures really cemented his global status. Remember the U.S. tour in the 70s?
Oh, yeah, massive. The sources say over 8 million people saw it. It was a huge diplomatic event, too, organized by the Met. And later tours have drawn enormous crowds as well.
They showcase the incredible craftsmanship, the wealth, but they also act as these, cultural ambassadors. And now, as we said, the artifacts are getting their final home in the Grand Egyptian Museum.
He's just become this pop culture icon, hasn't he? King Tut. There are songs, he pops up everywhere.
But that modern fame also leads to modern debates, particularly around how he actually looked, the facial reconstructions, and the whole issue of skin color.
Right. There have been a few attempts using CT scans, 2005, 2022, 2023, and that 2005 one especially stirred things up.
Yeah, the reconstruction showed him with relatively light skin, and critics immediately said, hang on, that doesn't match the painted statues and things from his tomb.
National Geographic, who backed one reconstruction, said they aimed for a kind of middle tone because the exact color wasn't known, but yeah, it caused controversy.
And you have experts weighing in. Someone like Nina Jablonski suggested, based on the tomb art, maybe more moderate tan complexion. Others, like Stuart Tyson Smith, argued lighter depictions might reflect modern biases, considering ancient Egyptians, especially further south, likely had darker skin.
And the debate goes beyond scientific reconstruction into artistic interpretation, right? Like that whole issue with the Dutch Museum exhibit.
Ah, yes. The mask, based on the rapper Nas, depicted with very prominent Afrocentric features, that caused a real backlash from Egyptian authorities and scholars.
They saw it as pushing Afrocentric theories they consider inaccurate, distorting Egyptian identity.
Yeah, while the museum framed it as being about art and cultural dialogue, not race, the sources show it tapped into these really complex, sensitive issues about heritage, identity, who gets to interpret the past, and concerns about Western appropriation.
It really highlights how these ancient figures, like Tutankhamun, become sort of touchstones for our own contemporary conversations and debates.
Absolutely. So wrapping it all up, we've seen this incredible story of a chance discovery, a tomb miraculously preserved against all odds.
We've glimpsed the breathtaking treasures inside, the sheer wealth that made a little-known king famous worldwide.
We've looked at the curse and how it seems to be more media hype than ancient magic, especially when you look at the actual evidence.
We've delved into Tutankhamun's short but important life, reversing his father's revolution, the mystery around his health, and the likely cause of his death. That broken leg combined with malaria.
And we touched on the succession struggle that ended a dynasty, but ironically preserved Tutankhamun's legacy for us thousands of years later.
It's quite a tale, from being almost wiped from the records to becoming this global symbol of ancient Egypt, all because his small tomb remained hidden.
And it makes you think, doesn't it? How do all our modern tools, DNA, CT scans, but also our cultural lenses and debates, shape how we see and represent someone like Tutankhamun from so long ago? And what other factors, besides curses or grand narratives, really determine which fragments of the past survive and whose stories get told, while others